The sun had barely pierced the smoggy sky of downtown Metroville when I walked into the 34th floor of Orion Dynamics, coffee in hand and badge clipped neatly to my lapel. Another Monday. Another all-hands meeting. Another chance, I thought, to prove myself. But I was wrong. The glass-paneled boardroom was already buzzing with the usual energy. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Laughter that echoed too long. And at the center of it all, perched at the edge of the conference table like a queen on her throne, was Emery Locke, my teammate, my rival, my replacement. Beside her, our division head, Marcus Delane, stood with arms crossed, grinning like a proud uncle at a family reunion. "I want to take a moment," he said as the chatter died down, "to congratulate Emery on her promotion to Senior Operations Strategist. She's shown great synergy with the team, amazing adaptability, and, most importantly, she makes this place brighter every day." The applause that followed was immediate. I clapped too, slowly, deliberately, my palms tingling not with admiration but with disbelief. Senior Strategist. My promotion. The one I'd been groomed for. The one I'd worked toward for 4 years. The one I'd practically built with my bare hands, staying late, running emergency strategy sessions, and rescuing cross-functional projects that had been left to rot. And yet, here I was, Carolyn, 34, Masters in Organizational Systems, 5 years at Orion, and somehow invisible. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside. "Look, Kara," he said with a smile that tried to soften the blow, "this isn't a reflection on your performance." I raised an eyebrow. "You're sharp," he continued. "Probably one of the most capable people I've managed. But Emery. She brings warmth. People gravitate to her. She's approachable, she bonds with the team. And you, well, you're a little focused." "Focused," I repeated, biting back a bitter laugh. "You mean I don't flirt at happy hour and repost inspirational quotes in the Slack channel?" He chuckled nervously. "Come on, don't take it like that. We just need more team cohesion. Culture, you know?" I stared at him. Not because I was surprised. I wasn't. But because I realized, in that moment, how absurd it all was. "You mean I'm not palatable enough," I said finally, voice even. "Kara," he said, shifting uncomfortably, "I just think Emery's a better fit for where we're going." "Got it." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "What's this?" "My resignation," I said, placing it firmly in his hands. His eyes widened. "Kara, hold on. Let's not be hasty." "It's not hasty," I said, cool and composed. "I've been building something for a while now. Something real. And I'd rather put my energy into that than chase approval from a leadership team that only sees value in charisma." I turned on my heel and walked out of the room before he could respond. What Marcus didn't know, and what no one at Orion Dynamics had cared to ask, was that for the past 3 years, I'd been developing an advanced process analytics system. What started as a side project, a tool to reduce redundancies and forecast workflow risk, had grown into a comprehensive platform, one that had already been soft launched with a few pilot clients under the radar. The system, PulseLine, was lean, adaptive, and patented as of 3 weeks ago. And while Emery was bouncing from desk to desk with a smile and her morning kombucha, I had quietly saved Orion over $1.2 million in operating costs across 5 departments in under 18 months. But they hadn't seen that. They'd seen my quiet demeanor. My lack of office gossip. My unwillingness to let compliments substitute for KPIs. They'd seen all the wrong things, and missed the most important one. I didn't need their stage. I had built my own. The following week, while everyone else was planning a congratulatory lunch for Emery, I was meeting with a man named Ronan Vale, founder and CEO of Vanta Core Systems, the fastest growing business intelligence firm on the East Coast. He had reached out to me through a mutual connection after hearing about my exit. "We've been tracking your career from afar," he said, sipping black coffee across from me in the sleek minimalist cafe of the Redwood Innovation Hub. "I read your white paper on adaptive forecasting for supply chain operations. Brilliant stuff." "I didn't think anyone actually read that," I admitted. "Most don't," he replied. "But the ones who do, they're building the future." He leaned in. "We're scaling fast. Too fast, honestly. And we need someone who can think 5 moves ahead. Someone who's not just collecting data but bending it to tell the truth. Someone like you. I blinked. I'm not looking for a job, I said slowly. I'm looking for ownership. He smiled. You'll get it. Partnership, equity, the works. We want you leading product strategy, with full autonomy to develop PulseLine into our core offering. You'll be reporting to no one but the board. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was the offer. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, not from nerves, but from recognition. This was what it looked like when someone finally saw you. Not for your smile. Not for your small talk. But for your results. As I walked out of the cafe and into the early spring air, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt ready. Ready to build. Ready to lead. Ready to never again ask for permission to be great. And back at Orion Dynamics, I imagined Emery sliding into her new title, unaware that the very foundation she stood on was already cracking beneath her. Because she hadn't built it. I had. And now I was taking the blueprint with me. My first day at Vontacore didn't feel like a first day. No tedious HR slideshow. No awkward icebreakers about hobbies or favorite pizza toppings. Instead, I was escorted to the 26th floor, where the glass door slid open into a space that looked like the inside of a think tank stream, floor-to-ceiling screens, modular workspaces, and a long digital dashboard tracking global client performance in real time. In the center of it all was my office. It wasn't just a corner suite, it was the corner. Frosted glass with smart privacy panels, adjustable standing desk, custom touchscreen wall. But what struck me most wasn't the tech or the view, it was the name etched into the glass. Carolyn, Partner, Strategic Innovation. This time, the title matched the work. I barely had time to admire it before Ronan stepped in. They're ready for you, he said with a grin. Let's show them what PulseLine can really do. The next 8 weeks were a blur of code, strategy, and calibration. I built a team of analysts and engineers who weren't just smart, they were sharp, efficient, unbothered by buzzwords and perfectly in sync with the quiet intensity I brought to the table. We deployed PulseLine in phases, first internally, optimizing Vontacore's project turnaround times. The results were immediate, delays dropped by 47% in the first month. Resource overlap was eliminated. Client response time was halved. Then came the external rollouts. I watched as our biggest client, an international logistics firm, reduced shipping misfires by nearly 60% using our predictive load balancing feature. PulseLine wasn't just a system. It was an exoskeleton for broken workflows. It identified weaknesses and adapted. It learned. And it didn't care who smiled the most in meetings, it just worked. Which is why I wasn't surprised when 3 more clients requested early integration, or when Ronan called me into his office one morning with a stack of contracts. We've got 3 major firms interested in licensing the system, he said, eyes gleaming. They want your architecture, white labeled. We're talking 7 figures, minimum. Then let's make it 8, I replied, flipping open the first contract. He laughed. I like you more every day. I was ascending, finally. But not everyone was. Back at Orion Dynamics, things weren't going as planned. It started quietly, missed deadlines, minor budget slips, unexplained client dissatisfaction. Then the questions began: why were turnaround times suddenly longer? Why had their internal metrics flatlined? Why were clients slipping through the cracks? Because Emery Locke, with her charm and curated presence, had inherited a throne with no foundation. I know this because David Chong, the only colleague I'd respected at Orion, messaged me one night. David, heads up. Emery's drowning. People are talking. They can't figure out how you did what you did. Ops is falling apart. Me, she has the dashboards. The access. Everything I built. David, exactly. She has the tools. But not the blueprint. I sipped my tea, letting the irony settle. The system had never been plug and play. PulseLine wasn't a platform, it was a mindset. A language only data-fluent strategists could speak. And Emery? She'd been too busy learning everyone's birthdays to learn the back-end logic. 3 weeks later, An article broke on Inside Ops Weekly. Orion Dynamics loses 2 major clients, blames internal workflow disconnects. I read the piece with professional curiosity. The quotes were brutal. We were promised precision. What we got was a PowerPoint. CEO, Nunova Medical Systems. Whatever Carolyn had built, it left with her. Anonymous Orion stuffer. It felt surreal. My quiet departure was now causing aftershocks. I hadn't planned it that way. But then again, systems built in silence often make the loudest noise when they're gone. Ronan forwarded me the article later that day with a note. Can't buy that kind of PR. Want to increase licensing fees? I replied with one word, double. And we did. By the end of Q2, PulseLine had been adopted by 6 more companies. Our internal nickname for the rollout? Project Echo. Because everything I'd done in the background was now echoing through an industry that once tried to ignore me. Meanwhile, I got another text from David. David, rumor is Marcus is panicking. Emery's been put on a performance plan. He asked for your contact info. Me, what did you say? David, told him you were too busy leading to look back. But the real moment, the one that sealed everything, came during a leadership summit in Vancouver. I had just finished giving a keynote about adaptive systems when someone approached me as the crowd dispersed. A tall man. Late 40s. Loosened tie. Worn face. Marcus Delane. Of course. He extended a hand. Kara. This is long overdue. I shook it, professionally. I've been watching what you've built, he said, eyes scanning my name tag, which now read Chief Systems Architect, Vontacore Group. It's beyond impressive. Thank you. I should have listened, he added, quieter. Back then. You were ahead of us. I gave a polite smile. I didn't need you to see it then, I said. I just needed to build something that couldn't be ignored. His expression shifted, half respect, half regret. Well, you've done that. And then some. He asked if I'd ever consider consulting for Orion. I told him to send the request through legal. Because systems aren't run on apologies. They're run on design. And I had already designed my next move. 3 months after PulseLine's public rollout, Business Tech Digest released a headline that sent a ripple through the corporate world. The system that's changing everything, PulseLine now industry standard for operational efficiency. Below the headline was a photo of me, standing in front of the Vontacore headquarters, backlit by a sunrise through steel and glass. The caption read, Carolyn, the strategist who quietly redesigned how corporations run. I stared at the article for a full minute. Not because I was surprised, but because it felt like validation had finally caught up with the truth. What followed was an avalanche. Tech panels. Advisory board invites. Government agencies requesting demos. Universities asking if they could include PulseLine in their executive MBA curriculum. Vontacore, once seen as a scrappy upstart, was now the engine powering half of the top logistics and consulting firms in North America. We weren't chasing validation anymore, we were the benchmark. But as we rose, others fell. Namely, Orion Dynamics. I hadn't thought much about them since the summit in Vancouver. After my brief and civil conversation with Marcus, I'd filed them away in the past life drawer, alongside uncomfortable high heels and unpaid overtime. But life has a way of circling back, especially when there are receipts. It started with a text from David. David, you're going to want to see this. He attached a PDF, an internal memo leaked from Orion. The title alone told me everything I needed to know. Confidential, Emergency Restructuring and Talent Recovery Strategy. The memo detailed the full extent of the damage. Q2 client losses totaling over $24 million. 2 failed system overhauls attempting to replicate PulseLine. 35% employee turnover in under 6 months. Shareholder concerns reaching boiling point. In the margins, someone had scribbled in red ink. Find out if Kara's system can be licensed. I laughed out loud. That same week, I received an official inquiry from Orion's legal team, asking if Vontacore would consider licensing PulseLine to them on a limited use basis. Ronan forwarded it to me with a note. Do we even dignify this with a reply? I didn't reply right away. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with my strategic partnerships team. We'd received dozens of licensing inquiries, but Orion's required a different level of consideration, not because of who they were, but because of who they used to be to me. Here's my condition, I said, calmly. If we move forward, I want full visibility. No white labeling. If Orion uses PulseLine, they use it with our branding. My name stays on the architecture. No one in the room objected. That's how far we'd come. Meanwhile, reports continued to trickle out of Orion. Emery had quietly resigned. Marcus was demoted and replaced by a task force from the board. They were scrambling, hemorrhaging trust, trying to paste together workflows with off-the-shelf software that couldn't scale. They'd built a house of glass, and forgotten who held the hammer. A month later, we inked a contract. Orion would license PulseLine for 2 years under full visibility, supervised implementation, and a hefty premium. It was the most expensive deal we'd signed to date. Marcus didn't show up for the negotiation call. But his replacement did, a woman named Syra, sharp-eyed and self-aware. We understand this comes with a little poetic justice, she said with a dry smile. Frankly, it's earned. I appreciated the honesty. And I appreciated even more that no one tried to downplay the past. They needed us. Not just the system, but the thinking behind it. During that same period, PulseLine was picked up by a major European consulting firm, and suddenly we weren't just operating in North America, we were global. Ronan and I traveled to London for a week of implementation meetings, and during a client dinner, he raised his glass to me. To Kara, he said, who turned rejection into architecture. The table clinked glasses, and I found myself smiling, not out of pride, but clarity. I hadn't set out to embarrass Orion. I hadn't planned revenge. I just wanted to be seen. And now? I was impossible to ignore. On a rainy Tuesday, back in New York, I stopped by the old Orion office out of curiosity. They'd rebranded. New signage. New colors. Same glass tower. But it looked smaller now. Faded. I stood across the street and watched the foot traffic. The familiar frantic shuffle of employees, the flickering lights behind the tinted windows. I could almost hear the echo of my own footsteps, once so eager, so desperate to belong. I felt no bitterness. Only gratitude. They hadn't given me what I wanted, but they'd given me what I needed. The push. The friction. The fire. A week later, Forbes reached out. They wanted to feature me in their Leaders Who Redefined the Corporate Map issue. The photo shoot was scheduled at Buntacore HQ. The photographer asked me to stand in front of a whiteboard filled with PulseLine diagrams and notes. At the top, written in black marker, was a quote I'd scribbled months earlier after my first major rollout. Silence builds cathedrals. Let them laugh while you build. She asked what it meant. I told her, it's what I lived through. Let people underestimate you. Just keep building. The results will speak louder than the noise ever could. The email came on a quiet Sunday morning, sandwiched between a delivery confirmation and a newsletter I never remembered subscribing to. The subject line was simple. National Innovation Council, invitation to join. I almost dismissed it as spam until I saw the sender, Jillian Marks, Undersecretary of Commerce for Technology and Economic Growth. I opened the message and read it 3 times. They were forming a new council, an elite advisory group that would shape national policy on digital transformation, operational innovation, and tech-driven public infrastructure. And they wanted me. 2 years ago, I couldn't get my own boss to take a meeting about a system that went on to disrupt half the industry. Now, the federal government wanted my input on how to build smarter, more sustainable systems across transportation, healthcare, and education. I stared out the window of my Brooklyn brownstone, the city quiet below. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't know my next move instantly. The offer was huge. It would mean national influence, access to top-level decision makers, the chance to affect systems far beyond corporate operations. But it would also mean stepping back from PulseLine. Not walking away, just no longer leading every implementation, every expansion. No more running the show solo. I'd have to appoint someone to carry the torch forward. Could I let go of the thing I had built from scratch? I closed my laptop and sat with the question. That Monday, I met with Ronan in our corner conference room, a place we called the Vault. It was where we made every major decision, from our first licensing deal to our international expansion. He listened quietly as I laid it out. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled. "Well," he said, "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. But I also knew this day would come." "You did? Kara, you were never going to be boxed in forever. PulseLine was always a launch pad, not a finish line." He tapped his fingers on the table. "You've built something scalable, repeatable, adaptable, and most importantly, you've trained a team that thinks like you. You don't need to be in the weeds for this thing to fly. It's time for you to move from the engine room to the bridge." I smiled, slow and real. That was the clarity I needed. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I appointed Aaron Calloway, our head of systems engineering, as interim director of PulseLine operations. Aaron was sharp, methodical, and had shadowed me on every major deployment for the past year. She didn't just understand the system, she understood the why behind it. I wasn't disappearing. I was evolving. And I had one more stop to make before stepping forward. The National Innovation Council held its first meeting at the federal campus in DC, a sleek, glass-wrapped complex that somehow looked futuristic and colonial at the same time. Inside, the room buzzed with a rare mix of public and private sector minds, scientists, architects, engineers, data scientists, economists. When I introduced myself, someone across the table interrupted. "You're the PulseLine woman," he said with a nod. "We modeled our municipal transit overhaul on your framework." That happened 3 more times before lunch. I wasn't a name tag anymore. I was a reference point. Our first task was daunting: help redesign how federal emergency response agencies share operational data in real time. They'd been using antiquated systems, prone to crashes and delays. We had to create something faster, smarter, responsive, and scalable. I leaned into the challenge like I had at Vantacore. Systems were systems. What changed were the stakes. Instead of missed KPIs, we were talking about missed ambulances. Instead of cost savings, we were talking about lives. The urgency lit a fire I didn't know I still had. By the end of the first month, I had drafted a hybrid infrastructure blueprint combining elements of PulseLine with decentralized field input systems. The team called it Project Atlas. Jillian called me into her office. "You're the axis this thing spins on," she said, tapping the folder. "You didn't just join the council, Kara, you're shaping it." Meanwhile, back at Vantacore, PulseLine was thriving. Aaron had rolled out updates I'd been drafting for months. The system was now live in 42 countries. Our client churn rate dropped below 2%. The board approved her as permanent director, and Ronan called to tell me it was the smoothest leadership transition he'd ever witnessed. "You built a system," he said. "And then you built the people who could run it without you. That's legacy, Kara. Not fame." His words stayed with me. One night, while walking through DC, I passed a bookstore. In the display window was a business bestseller with my face on the cover. Silent Systems: How Carolyn Changed the Way the World Operates. I hadn't even seen the final print. Inside was a chapter called The Collapse of the Pretenders, where a journalist chronicled the downfall of Orion Dynamics, using it as a cautionary tale about what happens when organizations reward performance theater over actual performance. Marcus had finally resigned. Emery was now an executive consultant, mostly posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn. Funny how things circle back. And then, a moment I hadn't expected. A message in my inbox, with a familiar subject line. From Emery Locke. Subject: Thank you. I hovered over it. Then opened it. Kara. I don't expect a response. I just wanted to say. I get it now. What you built. What you were trying to do. I didn't see it then. I thought charisma was the shortcut to value. I didn't realize it had to be backed by structure. I crashed hard after you left. But I've started over. Smaller company. New role. Learning more than I ever did at Orion. And I think I'm finally becoming someone who delivers, not just dustles. Thank you for setting the standard. Even if I was too late to meet it. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I believed her. Some lessons don't need answers. They just need space to grow. As I stood one morning before a room of mayors, commissioners, and engineers presenting Project Atlas, I realized something. This wasn't the climax. This was the expansion pack. What I'd built at Vantacore had changed the industry. What I was building now, it might just change the country. It was early autumn when the first draft of the new blueprint went to press, a collaborative publication by the National Innovation Council, showcasing groundbreaking strategies to modernize outdated systems in government, education, and healthcare. My chapter, simply titled Systems That Think, was the anchor piece. The final line? Success isn't about who shines loudest, it's about who builds quietest, and strongest. And for the first time in my career, that truth wasn't a whisper in the corner of a glass office, it was printed, published, and read by tens of thousands. I'd spent the past 6 months split between two lives, one as a federal strategist helping modernize public systems, the other as the founding mind behind PulseLine, now licensed in 18 countries and translated into 7 languages. At both tables, the conversation had shifted. No more "how did we miss you back then?" Now it was, "how can we design the next generation to think like you?" And still, every morning before meetings, panels, press interviews, I returned to the same ritual. A notebook. A quiet corner. And 5 minutes to write down one system no one else was thinking about. Because that's where everything started, not in the spotlight, not in applause, but in structure. In why. One afternoon, after a council session, Jillian Marks asked if I'd consider chairing the next wave of the Innovation Council, Project Horizon, focused on climate resilience and infrastructure response. "It's the biggest thing we've ever attempted," she said. "We need someone who doesn't just build tools, but philosophies." I asked for a week to think about it. Not because I doubted my ability, but because I'd learned something even more important than saying yes. The discipline of asking what for? What impact? What legacy? What kind of blueprint was I trying to leave behind? That night, I walked the quiet path behind my building, where the skyline framed the river like a living schematic. And I thought about the journey. I thought about 29-year-old me, quietly poring over performance reports at Orion Dynamics, while Emery held court in the break room. I thought about that infamous promotion day, when I was told I was too focused on results like it was a flaw, not a virtue. I remembered sliding my resignation letter across Marcus Delane's desk, and how inside that envelope was a second document that would become a blueprint for change. Back then, I'd been angry. Determined. Hungry to prove them all wrong. But now? I didn't need to be right anymore. I needed to be effective. So I said yes to Project Horizon, but under one condition. "I'll lead," I told Jillian, "but we'll also build a mentorship pipeline under it. Every department we impact must partner with a university or under-resourced community program. We aren't just updating systems, we're updating who gets to build them." She smiled like I'd passed some invisible test. Exactly what I hoped you'd say. Months passed in fast, fulfilling blur, site visits, design sessions, mentorship summits. Project Horizon became a new kind of initiative, one that didn't just fix broken systems, but re-engineered the pipelines of talent and trust behind them. And quietly, in the background, PulseLine hit a milestone. 1 billion in cost savings, globally. We celebrated quietly, no press release, no gala. Just a simple dinner with the team who'd helped me build it. Erin, now a powerhouse in her own right. Marcus, one of our new senior advisors, yes, that Marcus, now reformed, humbler, and finally walking the walk. People can change. If they want to. If they're given a mirror sharp enough to reflect the truth. One day, a thick envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a letter on crisp, dark gray stationery. Dear Kara. My name is Elijah Mercado. I'm a high school senior at Crestbridge Tech Magnet in Detroit. We read your article in class and studied the PulseLine framework. Our teacher said you were once told you weren't team-oriented enough for a promotion. I just wanted to say, thank you. I always felt like I had to be louder to be seen. But reading your story, I realized that building quietly doesn't mean building weak. I'm applying to Vantacor's internship next fall. I hope to help build the next PulseLine someday. I read the letter 3 times, my chest tight with something deeper than pride. It was legacy. Not the kind carved in corner offices or Forbes covers, but the kind that plants seeds in people you'll never meet. And then came the final loop. Orion Dynamics, what was left of it, filed for acquisition. A shell of its former self, stripped of contracts, credibility, and leadership. Vantacor didn't acquire them. But PulseLine did license them, for a fraction of the price they once offered to match my salary. It wasn't revenge. It was irony. A system they once overlooked had now become their system of survival. And me? I didn't look back. Because I was already sketching the next version. PulseLine 2.0, built not just to optimize, but to anticipate. A thinking system. A decision partner. A tool for governments and corporations alike. A blueprint for the world that was coming. 1 year after I joined the Innovation Council, I gave a TED Talk. The room was full. The live stream hit over 1 million viewers. I didn't talk about PulseLine. I didn't talk about Orion. I talked about the quiet ones. The professionals sitting in back corners, passed over for promotions, told they were too technical, too serious, too focused on the work. I told them, you're not too much. You're the blueprint. You are the hidden gears of progress. And the day will come when your silence becomes a structure, and your precision becomes the map everyone else tries to follow. The applause was overwhelming. But what mattered most was that backstage, a 19-year-old intern approached me, shaking, clutching a notebook. Kara, she said, I'm building a tool like yours. I thought no one would ever care about what I do. I smiled and took her hand. They will, I said. Just keep building.